And there's the screen share there. Okay, right. So welcome everybody to Food and Mood for Children and Teenagers. Now, hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm not able to get rid of the bit on the side because I'm not using PowerPoint, I'm using another form, but you'll be able to see the slides. They're really for my benefit. There are a couple of interesting things there, but don't worry too much about reading what's on them. I'm going to talk through it. So let's move on to the next one. So Lucy, just a quick 30 seconds about me. Most of you know who I am, but some of you I've never met before. And it's just to say that I'm a nutritional therapist and I'm a specialist in child and teenager nutrition. I have a degree in biochemistry and chemistry, and then I trained at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in London to become a nutritional therapist. And I'm a registered nutritional therapist, and I'm a member of various governing bodies. But what is probably just as important is that I have two teenagers and a tween. So I hear you. I've been through the children thing. I'm now in the teens zone. And I'm kind of here. I'm on your side. I get it, what we're going through. So my aims for today, there's a lot of nutritional information out there now, which is of course fantastic. But it can be very, very confusing to people. And I talk to a lot of people, I talk to a lot of parents, and they're really in a muddle about what's the best thing to do. What should we be eating? What should we not be eating? And so that is my job as a nutritional therapist, is to simplify it down and make it practical. Now, as part of our training, when you're a registered nutritional therapist, part of our training is looking at scientific studies, looking at what is out there, and then simplifying it down to simple recommendations. And in fact, as a registered nutritional therapist, the information I give out has to be science-based. It has to be based on the latest research. A nutritional therapist then takes those recommendations further, and we work with people on an individual basis to make those recommendations very specific, very personalized to somebody, to their lifestyle. I want you to go away today with a couple of things that you can do to improve your child or your teen's mood. And it's about making this connection between what we're eating and how we're feeling. I'm just going to tell you a quick story. When I started practicing back in 2005, this young woman came into my clinic with a family member. And this woman was schizophrenic. And she was being cared for by a medical team. She was being medicated, and she was actually living in sheltered accommodation because she wasn't able to live on her own. And she came with a family member because this family member was really interested to see if nutrition could help her. Now, when I looked through the questionnaire, this young woman was drinking 16 cans of Coca-Cola a day. And on top of that, she was having I think it was about 8 cups of tea a day, each with 2 spoonfuls of sugar in it. But what was even more shocking to me was that nobody in her whole medical team had even asked her the question about what she was eating and what she was drinking. Nobody had asked. Nobody had even looked at that. Thankfully, things have moved on in those 20 or so years, and we are, there is this connection. There is becoming this connection. People are realizing that what we're eating is affecting our mood and affecting our mental health. Now, just a quick word about context. So this webinar, I'm talking about mood in the context of feeling a bit down in the dumps, feeling a bit grumpy, the moody teens, the grumpy tweens. We have an expression at home where we say someone's being a bit spiky. I'm not talking about sort of medically diagnosed depressive disorders or serious anxiety or anything like that. Now, that's not to say that nutrition can't help. It's just I want to keep this webinar light and general. If you do have anything that you want to discuss with me, just send me an email and we can set up a call if you've got any kind of deeper questions there. And the other thing is that nutrition is never the only thing. With our teens and children, it's never just about the food. There's all sorts of other things going on. But my line is, if we can get the nutrition as right as it can be, then we're kind of on the right path to it. So what we'll cover very briefly, there's sort of 3 main themes. There are many more themes that I could discuss, but these I feel are the most important. Hunger and blood glucose, or blood sugar, gut health, and sleep. So number one, hunger. So hunger is a normal feeling. It is normal to feel hungry, but I think sometimes as parents we get a bit anxious that our children are going to be hungry. Oh no, they're going to be hungry. Oh no, no. We sort of panic a bit. The body is quite amazing at mobilizing energy sources to fuel us. But obviously, when we get hungry, we get grumpy. That's not just a child or a teenage thing. That's everybody. And some children get more hungry than others and more often. And you will know if you've got a child like that. But what I'd say with the hunger, it's about identifying the times of day. I'm sure you probably are already doing this, even if it's subconsciously. There are certain times of the day where they're really hungry and things kick off. For us, it's when they all come back from school. And I live in France, the school day is very long. They get back quite late. They're all a bit hungry. They're all a bit grumpy. And that's when, it's not great. But I'm always one for flipping a negative into a positive. When they're hungry, take that as an opportunity. Okay, so think this is a great opportunity. They're really hungry. I'm going to get the good things in first. So this is when, and we'll talk about snacks a bit later, but you can get the snacks in, the hard-boiled eggs, the cheese sandwiches, the tuna sandwiches, vegetable sticks and hummus, fruit, that sort of thing. And then they can have the biscuit and cakey things afterwards. So use the hunger as an opportunity. Now, obviously, sometimes people and children and our teens, they get this extreme hunger, this kind of on the floor, absolutely over it hunger. And that, I would say, is not such normal hunger, and that needs work. If your child is getting massively hungry like that, we need to look at what they're eating and what we can do to make that better. So this leads nicely into blood sugar concept. When I talk about blood sugar, I mean biochemically blood glucose, but I'll use the words interchangeably, but I mean glucose in the sense we tend to use blood sugar. So I'm just going to show you, my slides have gone a bit weird, so I'll just fast forward. Now, this is a really useful graph. And for those of you that came to my sports nutrition webinar back in January, you'll recognize this. But I'm going to use my arrow and hopefully it won't change things here. When we eat a meal that is high in refined carbohydrates or lots of sugar, where the carbohydrates are broken down and released quite rapidly into the bloodstream, you get a rush of glucose into the bloodstream, whoosh, it goes in like that. Now, what happens is the body has to keep these blood glucose levels within quite strict limits. And when the glucose gets too high, we have an amazing organ called the pancreas that produces insulin. And what insulin does, the role of insulin is it makes the cells of the body suck out the sugar from the blood and it stores it away, bringing the blood glucose levels back down again. Now, the problem arises when we've had this meal with a lot of carbohydrates. I'll give an example of a meal that could do this. This is your breakfast, your sort of highly refined breakfast cereal with some white toast and jam and a glass of orange juice. That's a lot of glucose that gets absorbed and digested very quickly. You end up with the low blood sugar here because the body has dragged out too much glucose and you've got low blood sugar. So even though you've eaten a lot of glucose, a lot of sugary food, you end up with low blood glucose, this glucose crash. Now, how does this relate to the topic of this webinar? When people get low blood glucose, they can feel very grumpy, very a bit down in the dumps, we would say. People also crave sugar, of course, because the blood sugar level is low. Some people feel very tired. Some people lose concentration. You might have heard of the expression hangry, hungry and angry, but this is that on the floor hunger. Some people shake that they're so hungry. So what happens is you reach for the sugary food because that is the body's normal response. And the whole cycle happens again. And I've got a good graph actually here that shows what can happen through the day is that this red line, you're having your blood sugar peak, your blood sugar trough all through the day. But the good news is that you can make it the green line, which is more stable. Let's just go back to this graph here. And this is your typical sort of 2-3 hours after breakfast. So it's when you've had breakfast, then, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, you're craving a biscuit or some chocolate because you've got low blood glucose. It's typical as well. I work with a few students at the moment. So their lunch is like a ham baguette with white bread, which is a lot of carbohydrates. And then it's that 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're reaching for the chocolate muffins because you're feeling a bit flat. And the whole cycle starts again. But as I said, the good news is this is relatively easy to correct. So what can we do about it? How to balance these blood sugar levels. So I have this little formula that I give to people. I like these little kind of formula things to remember. So breakfast, brown, protein, fat, savory, question mark. So for your breakfast, you're looking at swapping white to brown. So if you're having toast, swapping it to brown. If you're having a cereal, swapping it to kind of more muesli-based whole grain cereal. What I sometimes do with children is that we mix half and half, like the cereal they're used to, and then we mix that with a bit of muesli just to get them used to it. Be careful with mueslis because some of the crunchy ones are really high in sugar. They taste amazing, but the packaging suggests that they're quite healthy, but you need to steer away from those ones if you are balancing your blood glucose levels. So you're switching that to brown. You're then making sure that your breakfast contains some protein and some fats. Now, why is that important? When you eat protein and fat with a meal, the protein and the fat delays the absorption of the glucose into the bloodstream. So you get a much lower glucose spike than before. So for example, on your breakfast cereal, adding in a handful of nuts, adding in some seeds to that, adding in a dollop of full-fat Greek yogurt, those two things could be enough to make that breakfast really, really stable. The other thing is switch to a savory breakfast. We've just done this with my youngest. She has a dippy egg with brown toast and butter every morning for breakfast because we have breakfast very early. And that really sustains her through till lunchtime now. Whereas before, when she was sort of on the cereals and things, she was getting hungry by about sort of 10, 9, but really hungry in the morning. So that's been quite helpful for us. Again, with the lunch, using the same formula. So switching to brown, making sure your lunch contains enough protein and some good fats. And lunch is normally savory. So I'll give another example. My son takes a packed lunch to school. So I do a pasta. He likes these pasta salads. We do some brown pasta. It's whole grain pasta because the fiber in the whole grains, again, delays the absorption of the glucose into the bloodstream. So brown pasta with 2 hard-boiled eggs and with some olive oil on there and usually some vegetables. And again, with lunches, it's about looking at the balance. It's about having a decent amount of protein with your pasta or with your carbohydrate, rather than masses of pasta and a little bit of protein. Sometimes it's just changing the balance there. And then going into snacks, easing towards savory snacks or having something savory first, making sure there's some protein in there. So we said sandwiches before. Hard-boiled eggs are like a wonder food. Cheese sandwich, tuna sandwich, hummus and crackers. I like fruit with cheese, apple with a chunk of cheese, piece of fruit with a handful of nuts, or muesli bars or something like that. The other thing is, though, that lots of other things can affect your blood glucose control. So it's not always just about what you're eating, although what you're eating can make a huge difference. There's a genetic element to that. Your gut bacteria that we're going to talk about next, they affect how your body deals with glucose. Sleep is another one. When you have one bad night's sleep, it actually affects how you process your breakfast the next morning. And we all know if you've ever kind of had to get up really early in the morning or you've had a disrupted sleep, you tend to, well, certainly I do tend to kind of reach for the sugary foods in the day more than I would normally. We haven't got time to discuss stress today, but of course it is important in this context. But stress, again, affects the way that you manage this blood glucose. Now let me move on to my next slide. Right, gut health. So what's our gut health got to do with mood? Well, actually an awful lot. We have got bacteria in our digestive system, and these bacteria break down food and they produce various substances. They produce all sorts of things. They produce enzymes to digest milk. They produce vitamins. They produce feel-good neurotransmitters. They produce metabolites. And some of these things have a positive effect. Some of these things have a negative effect on brain health. And basically, it depends on the type of bugs we've got in there. So the simple message is that your gut bugs talk to the brain by the substances that they're producing. and the brain talks to the gut bugs. And you might have heard of the expression, the gut-brain axis. So the simple message is that we want lots of good bugs in our digestive system and less of the not so good. And again, this is actually relatively easy to do with a little bit of thought and planning. So number one is fiber. The gut bugs absolutely love fiber. It's like their wonder food. And so by adding in fiber, you're feeding the gut bugs. Going back to the blood glucose control, adding in more fiber helps delay that absorption of the glucose into the blood. So you're helping to balance those blood glucose levels as well. So fiber, what are we doing? We're adding in plants. Now, this does not mean you need to go plant-based in your diet, but it means adding in everywhere. So I've got lots of examples here. It's about taking the chance every meal, where can we add in more fiber? So again, if you're adding in some seeds or some porridge oats to your breakfast, you're also helping with the blood glucose control. So I love it when a recommendation ticks a number of boxes. It's like a kind of easy win. So what can we do? How can we add in the fiber? So with the fiber, it's not necessarily about quantity, it's about variety, because different gut bugs like different sources of fiber. So adding in vegetables, adding in plants where you can. So when we talk about plants, we're talking about fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. We're talking about things like beans, lentils. We're also talking about herbs and spices. All these foods have compounds in them that the gut bugs absolutely love. So I'll give another example. I made some tuna sandwiches yesterday for the sport. So tuna sweet corn sandwiches. And I had a carrot and a courgette sort of, you know, in the bottom of the fridge. I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. So I grated them quickly and added it into the tuna mix. So that was then, you had tuna sweet corn, carrot and courgette. That was then 3 plants kind of in that meal. So it was adding that in there. I'm a huge fan of coleslaw, so grating up things like raw carrots, cabbages, fennel, and all that kind of thing. And if you don't have time to make a dressing, just use some shop bought mayonnaise, or even just chuck some olive oil on there, a bit of balsamic vinegar, a bit of salt and pepper, and you've got a really nice coleslaw. I'm a fan as well as using a lot of raw vegetables as starters or snacks. Again, when they're hungry let's say before supper time, they're all really hungry and everyone's a bit like, where's the food? Chuck a load of carrots or radishes, raw fennel on the table. They're hungry and they're more likely to eat it, and they're getting some more veg in there. And it's a bit about thinking outside the box, really, with how to add these things in and little kind of tricks that you learn as you go along. So the other thing is colour and variety. So there are some good gut bugs that absolutely love the purple pigments in grapes and berries. There are some gut bugs that love the green pigments in things like broccoli and kale. There are some gut bugs that love the bioflavonoids that you find in oranges and lemons and that sort of thing. So think about introducing a lot of colour into your food and adding it all in. And I always say, don't forget the boring vegetables and fruits. Things like a good old apple. You've got red apples, green apples, yellow apples. So buy a different variety next time you're out shopping, just to ring the changes, because those different coloured compounds feed different gut bugs. Don't forget things like onions as well. You've got yellow onions, red onions, white onions, spring onions, shallots. All those onions will have slightly different compounds in them that will feed the gut bugs. And I'll give a shout out for the potato. I have a bit of a thing about potatoes. Potatoes have had a really bad press recently. But when you cook potatoes and let them cool, the starch in the potatoes turns into something called resistant starch, and the gut bugs absolutely love it. So let's give a big shout out to potatoes, thinking about potato salads coming into the summer. They're a really good food to include for your gut bacteria. Now, fermented foods. This is a bit tricky with children and teens because of the taste. So I say to people, start with a natural yogurt, start with a bio yogurt, a yogurt that contains, lactobacillus bifidobacterium. You're probably all doing that anyway. Make sure it's a natural one, not with added in sugar. Start there. Now, I'm quite a fan of kefir and fermented milk. Kefir, they say, is like yogurt on steroids. The bugs in there are absolutely amazing. But it's quite a distinct taste. I have one child that can't even smell it. They find it so offensive. My other two, I can add in a bit to a smoothie and it's fine. So it is quite a personal thing. On the other hand, I know people that have had success, myself included, on kefir water, which is where you're using the kefir grains to ferment fruit juice. And obviously you can buy all these things as well. So have a bit of an experiment. Kombucha is another one that my children like. It's like a slightly fizzy fermented tea. So give that a go. Kimchi, which is your fermented cabbage, it's not that popular in our house. I keep making it and keep trying, but I'm sort of probably going to give up. But don't forget about the moldy cheese as well. If your child likes, you know, a camembert or a cheese like that, a little tiny bit of moldy cheese is introducing some good bugs in there. Another way to increase the good gut bugs is to reduce down your sugar and highly processed foods. We know that compounds in ultra processed foods do affect the gut bacteria, and sugar feeds the not such good gut bugs. So that's something to consider. People often ask me about probiotics, and the research is changing a little bit on probiotics. Problem is, when you take a probiotic, you're introducing maybe 1 or 2 strains of bacteria. And to increase our good gut bugs, we're looking about having a lot of different variety. So probiotics can be useful in certain scenarios, but often it's actually better to do the things that we've discussed here, the fiber and the color and variety. That can actually be more beneficial to the gut bugs than introducing 1 or 2 strains of probiotics. But there have been some studies that have come out about using particular strains of probiotics specifically for mood. And I think that probiotics, it's a bit sort of watch this space for the probiotics. I think this is where the research is going to take us. They called there's a special name that they're sort of between medications and probiotics. And I think this is where things are going to go, which is really interesting. So yeah, there's some research out there showing that certain strains helps mood with teenagers, anxiety and stress. Probiotics can help. So it's a bit watch this space. I think it's a bit early to say, yes, take this probiotic and it's going to help with your mood problems. I think it's more complicated than that, but certainly worth talking about. Right, so sleep. So we all know when we're tired, we get grumpy. It's the same for adults as well, but it's probably a bit more pronounced, particularly in younger children. So it's making sure your child or teen's getting enough sleep. Now, these stats here just came from Great Ormond Street Hospital on the website. You can Google how much sleep does my child need. And it's maybe worth just, if you're worried about sleep, just having a look, because when they go to bed, they're not necessarily going to sleep. That's the thing that's, you know, that they're not necessarily sleeping when they go to bed. And sometimes it's about having those boundaries around sleep and timings. Now, things are difficult for us. There are things obviously that impact the sleep and that can disrupt the sleep. Things like screen time, mobile phones, technology, gaming, all that sort of thing. And it's really difficult because my children need their computers to do their homework, and sometimes they're doing homework really late at night, and that's not good for their sleep at all. It's very, very frustrating. I do work with some teenagers who are away from home and they are on their phones in bed till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And what we would call their circadian rhythms are completely out of sync. They're absolutely wired in the evenings, and then they can't get out of bed in the mornings, and they are falling asleep during the day, and everything's just got completely out of kilter. And that's terrible for kind of mood and any kind of anxiety or anything like that. So it's about really looking at how you can push that back. Now, if you've got younger children, you're at an advantage here because you can get these boundaries in place before it actually happens. But sleep is very important, and there are studies coming out now. Let me see what I've got on my list. Yeah, so there's studies that's showing that sleep deprived adolescents, it does impact their mood, and it also impacts your glucose tolerance and the way you deal with glucose. And they're saying that even catching up sleep over the weekend is not as good as consistent sleep in the night. And they're showing as well that children, adolescents with sleep problems or bad sleep hygiene are more likely to have sort of mood and depressive disorders later on. So the research, we know that sleep makes us feel bad. We intrinsically know that, but it's good that we have these studies that are showing it kind of in real time with real sort of facts and figures. The other thing is that poor sleep impacts our gut bugs. So everything is kind of impacting each other, which is always quite interesting. So basically, a quick little summary then. To support our mood, we really need to balance these blood glucose levels with meals and snacks, making sure that there's fibrous foods, enough protein and enough fats in those meals. Gut-friendly foods, increasing the plants. Where can you sneak those plants in? Where can you get the plants in at every meal? And of course, having quality sleep. Just going back to the plants and the fiber, I do get a lot of parents that say to me, oh, my child won't eat vegetables or they don't eat fruit and this and that. That's okay, because that might come later. There are in the interim sort of fiber products that you can mix into smoothies or mix into yogurt. I'm always about food first and only using supplements when they're really kind of needed. And also, I'm very conscious with these webinars. I don't want to be pushing products or trying to push people onto products. But if that is your situation and you think that your child might need a little bit of help in the fiber department, then email me and I can recommend something that might be able to help. So if you want more information, do drop me an email. We can book in a free call if you want to discuss something or see how nutrition might be able to help. But please do interact with me. I like making connections with people. If people want to ask things, it makes life interesting to be able to help. So please do that. And I will stop sharing here. Just stop recording. So thank you very much for taking part, and I will stop recording.